You don't know where I am. And you'll never see me coming.
Welcome to the Objective Secure podcast. My name's Mike.
I'm Emma.
And this is episode 21, See It Coming. So we're going to be talking about what you see is what you get, or WYSIWYG as it is known for short, and covering not just the modelling aspect of the hobby, but also the painting side of the hobby, because there's been a few developments over the last couple of months in regards to how you're meant to paint your models for some of the organised play events that are occurring around the world. And I suppose we'll have to cover our stance on that as well when we get into the main topic, and it's quite an in-depth conversation. I actually started from seeing something on Facebook not so long ago, and we've obviously got our own opinions on whether you should or shouldn't be painting your toy soldiers the way you see fit, and other tournament organisers have their thoughts. In the meantime, though, before we get stuck into that topic, we're going to talk about our show, and we're going to talk about a few of our new contributors to the page. We're going to talk about my new Titan. We'll start with the Titan because that's a topic I like.
First of all, let's start. Today's the 4th of July, so a belated happy Canadian Independence Day to any Canadian listeners, and happy American Independence Day to American listeners.
Is it really Canadian Independence Day as well?
On the 1st of July it is.
Oh, okay.
That's why I said belated.
Well, yeah, but because of the time differences and things, I wasn't sure what was going to happen.
Well, if you actually manage to get this out on time, it will go out on American Independence Day.
If, on the other hand, it's after midnight our time.
It'll be belated for them as well. Oh, no, because, if it's after midnight our time, it's still Independence Day.
So what you're saying is I have to stay up and finish editing this?
Yes, but I did make that perfectly clear earlier in the day.
We are running a bit off schedule at the moment. We're running about 12 hours later than we'd like to be normally because we've got school holidays.
We're running about 2 days later than we'd like to be because we've got school holidays, and it's tricky to do this while the kids are listening to My Little Pony.
Yeah, well, My Little Pony has seen its feature in a few of the tabletop games, but it doesn't exactly, it's not conducive to a podcast. Yeah. So we waited till they're asleep, and it's getting a bit late here now as well. So we're going to persevere, though, get it all recorded so you can listen to us, hopefully in your own time. So we're back to my Titan.
Okay, your Titan.
Is
it even out of the bag yet?
Yeah, I've pulled it all apart. It's actually at your feet.
Yeah, so the resin that needs to be washed and sorted for the Battlescape for show, that hasn't been done, but the Titan's
I made sure all the parts were there.
All right.
So if you haven't caught the live stream conversation where this has all taken place about a month, maybe 6 weeks ago now, on our live chat, Emma made a comment that basically said I could go and get a Titan. And
it's not how I intended that comment.
No, but that's what happened. And it just so happens that one of our listeners and attendees of our events got in touch about 48 hours later and said, hey, I've got a really cheap Titan to sell. It's brand new. It's in bag. And so now I've got a new toy to paint.
To paint?
To
play
and paint. Yep. It's late. That's fine.
That's a new one.
Yeah. It's a Chaos Reaver Titan. And there was a poll I put up on the Facebook page just over a week ago now. I haven't actually checked the results. They should have expired by now, as to whether I should paint it first or paint a Harlequin army. And I think the last time I checked, the Titan was 2-1 ahead. So I think it's going to have to get slotted into the schedule while I do other stuff as well.
I think we might have to write a schedule. But anyway.
Yeah, that might help. Yeah. So if you've got any suggestions for colour schemes for this big boy, I don't have any idea at the moment. I was just going to do it red and chaosy, but I don't mind the idea of exploring some of the other unique colour schemes out there. And all I've found so far are red and maroon and that sort of dried blood colour scheme. So I'd really like something a bit different. But if you've got any suggestions, send us a message, Facebook, email, usual stuff. And then I'll be taking photos and all the rest of it as I build the damn thing, because I suspect it's going to take a little while. And in the meantime, I've also got a bunch of Dark Eldar, or Drakari, I should say, Reaver jet bikes sat here on the table, which are finally seeing some love. They're being assembled at the moment, in between other stuff. And I put up our first post about Age of Sigmar 2.0 about a week ago, or just under a week ago now, about my Daughters of Cain. And we've been doing a bunch of Shadespire as well. So there's been lots of hobby stuff happening, and in between planning for show, which is taking up vast amounts of time.
That's the majority of pretty much the entirety of my time is show, which is Southern Hemisphere Open, happening 22 to 24 September at Ascot Showgrounds, Ascot Racecourse.
It's the grandstand building, so we've got about 3,000 square metres. You'll have seen photos of it on the Facebook page if you were with us September last year, and there's videos and all sorts of stuff there. You can still go and check it out post-event. We've got a bunch of extra, attendee coming along this year to make sure we've got plenty of product and availability for people coming along. Games, a whole bunch of tournaments. If you live in Western Australia, you'll have heard us harping on about this for months anyway, and you should be used to it by now.
And if you haven't heard about it, then let us know, because clearly we're doing something wrong.
Yeah. We've also got the Australasian Team Challenge for 40k coming over.
Australasian now?
I don't know.
Australian and New Zealand Team Challenge.
I don't know. I've given up trying to, because I know that the X-Wing guys do the Australian New Zealand Team Challenge as well, which is just going to make things even more confusing.
It's not, because one of them talks about 40k and one of them talks about X-Wing, and I think that's a fairly big distinguishing feature.
But they both abbreviate down to ANZTC.
No, they don't. They both abbreviate down to the ATC. But
I've ended up in a group with that, and that's just confused me.
Well, why don't you leave the one for X-Wing, given you're not playing in it?
So we've got the boys coming over from Victoria and New South Wales and Queensland and a bunch of other spots around Australia to come and play 40k, which is going to be awesome.
And New Zealand.
And the New Zealand team making a return for the first time in a couple of years now. I think the last time they were part of the event was 2015?
I don't know why you're looking at me, because I don't know.
It was when I went to Queensland.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you exactly.
No.
I know it's a year I went, so... We also have to give a special shout out to the Australians heading over to the ETC, the European Team Challenge, the first weekend in August, or the first week in August, I believe it is.
It's about a month away.
Yeah, I know a couple of the guys have already started making the trip over now because they're going to do a bit of a holiday.
Oh, nice. They're having a heat wave in certain places over there.
Yeah, so it's being held in Croatia this year, I believe.
Hailing here today. The idea of heading over for a holiday in the heat seems quite nice.
Like I say, a couple of the Aussies are already in Europe now, or in transit to Europe. They're going to do a holiday and check out Europe before heading to Croatia to play. I don't know exactly how many teams there are. They released the preliminary army lists 24 hours ago now, I think it was, which we'll either try and put a link on or some way of letting people have a look at them. I know that Canada's attending this year with one of my friends and friends to the show, Val, whose name I can never say, his surname. I met him at LVO in 2017. Also, one of the other guys I met at LVO, Pascal from New Zealand, is part of the Australian team this year.
Ah, cool.
So he's getting, and we should see him come over for show as part of the New Zealand 40k team.
Fantastic.
So, wish the boys the very best if we have results post-event.
Any Australian girls head?
There is a Perth local, Pete Platel, who's been very active with the team events for the last couple of years in particular with 40k. He's taking his Ultramarines with him. But yeah, look, if we get some results before the next podcast, which I don't think we will, it might be...
Well, not if it's not till the first week in August, because we'll have another podcast before then, possibly even two. But anyway, when we have results, we'll talk about them.
Absolutely. So, all the best to them and everyone else competing that weekend. Having been there once, it's not to Croatia specifically, but the event's an amazing experience. So, it's one that I'm a little bit jealous of, but, we've got plenty of other stuff going on that we've got to deal with as well. So,
yeah.
We've also got our mixed doubles 40k tournament coming up, which is...
That's right. End of July.
Yeah, it is. It's only like 3.5
only a couple
weeks
of
away,
weeks,
4 weeks away. We've got about 20 teams of 2 so far, which is really cool. If you haven't already and you are coming to the event, head on over to downunderpairings.com, find the tournament.
After you have purchased your tickets through the OBSEC website,
yes.
head over to Down Under Pairings.
We haven't quite got that link working yet between the two websites, but we're getting there. I know that Diffie, who we'll talk about in a second, has been making more and more changes to the website for tournament organisers. But yeah, we've already got some teams registered there, and I've been checking off their payments as well, so that it's all syncing up, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And we've got more than a few women coming this year, from what I understand. We've got, I know that there's about 4 returning women that I'm aware of, and there's at least 2 new ones, which is great.
It's really exciting. So the idea of the event actually started out, as, sort of a brainwave for me as we were travelling down to our first Linebreaker event. And it was saying, well, my experience of the first Masters that we ran was hearing women saying that they played, but they could never come to a tournament because it was too intimidating, or they didn't feel like they were a strong enough player in order to do that, or they hadn't been playing long enough, or, just there were a whole heap of reasons why. So we had one female player that first Masters, and she was representing all of the female gamers in WA.
If you haven't met Guylaine Plateau, you can check her out on our YouTube channel. She and I play a game with her Death Guard, and she's a very long-term hobbyist and a lovely person to be around as well, which is not surprising. She has been to a number of our events over the years. Yeah.
So it was, how do we make it so that this is, I don't like using the term soft entry point, but this is a
more comfortable entry point,
a gentle way that women can come and experience events and what it is to play in a tournament, and to feel supported by having, I guess, someone with them that they feel comfortable with, and feeling as though they're, I just guess, a little bit less daunted. So it started out, and I wrote about it a few times on the blog, about it being like a great big hug, and that was the way I wanted people to experience it. It has shifted slightly since then, and now it's not necessarily, the mixed doubles is not necessarily around a male-female mix, but we are also looking at people bringing in different generations, or a new player teaming up with somebody who's a more veteran player, so that, again, they get that support as they're coming into their first tournaments if they want it.
Yeah. We've had parent and child, we've had spouses, we've had, like you say, a veteran tournament player and his buddy who's just sort of
coming back after
edgy.
7 years of not playing, or
and I think we've got a few of all of those happening again this year.
Yeah, we're still very much encouraging women to come along and play, because I think it's a really great way. Yeah, it's a really great way to introduce them to the tournament that we offer and that we run and that are here, and introduce them to the tournament players and break down some of those stigmas around what tournaments are. It's something that I'm pretty passionate about.
It's a low points value as well, which means the barrier to entry. I mean, we've seen there was a local Shadespire event, which if you've checked out the website today, you'll have seen Natara's next post about her first tournament with Shadespire. Yep. And obviously that as an entry point, I think it was 5 games in one night with 4 models.
Yeah.
So in terms of management for a new player, that's actually a really good entry point. 40k can be quite daunting, particularly when you've got 30, 40, 50 models on the table. But I think
so many steps and so many processes.
See, I think there's less than Shadespire, though. I think Shadespire's level of complexity is higher because you've got the cards and the dice.
They clearly wrote their rules better for Shadespire than they did for 40k.
I don't think there'll be a single listener who argues with that statement. But no, look, I think those sorts of small events like Shadespire and, like I say, with doubles being only $7.50 a player, means that you can kind of get a little army together, and it's not too much for you to have to micromanage when you don't have 25 different units with 10 models a unit or something silly like that. So, look, we're hoping to have another good turnout this year. And, have another, we had people dressing up. We've had costumes and armour and all sorts of stuff. So, sadly, though, of course, one of our loudest and most active in that regard is no longer living in Western Australia. So, he's going to be missed at this event, I think, by more than a few people. So, a shout out to Matt there if you're listening. What else have we got to talk about? We've
got Southern Hemisphere Open coming up, which I know I touched on very briefly a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah.
But as you just spoke about Shadespire, excitingly, so we have been invited to host the Southern Hemisphere's very first Grand Clash for Shadespire.
Yep, it's the first one outside of the States or the UK.
Yeah, and so we were quite excited about that, and 64 players, and then I was chatting with James from Warhammer World in Nottingham, and he was saying, why have you limited it to 64 players? And I said, well, because you told us to. And he's like, oh, no, there's no limit. So now we're trying to beat the record.
Yeah, so to the best of our knowledge and according to James, the number is 84 players to beat. That's what Adepticon had this year.
Earlier this year, yep.
So we're aiming for 86 at least. I know that Emma's got her own grand designs about what that number actually is, but 86 is still the record. So
86 will be the record, but I am aiming for 100. And I'm more than happy not to cap that. So if we want to get more than 100, that's fine as well.
the best part about it from our point of view as well is that, to our knowledge, at the very least, if you finish in the top 64, there are prizes, and it scales. The higher you finish, the better and the more prizes you get. There's also a bunch of giveaways and freebies as well, which is awesome. So as soon as we've got that pack, we'll make sure we get photos up on the Facebook page and the website, so you can see exactly what the Grand Clash pack, that's a mouthful, looks like. But it's really exciting. So that's happening on the Sunday, the 23rd of September at Show, and then we've got a whole bunch of other one-day tournaments across the 3 days, covering not just Games Workshop, but we're doing Privateer Press, we're doing Weird
14
Miniatures.
different gaming systems.
Fantasy Flight Games is being covered, Warlord Games. I'm going to kick myself after this because I can't remember who produces Beyond the Gates of Antares.
That's Warlord Games.
Is it Warlord Games?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
I'm 100% positive. It is, yeah. Oh, no. Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes, no, I am.
Okay. Dark Age is another one that we've got happening for the first time this year.
I don't know who produces that one.
So, no, we've got a whole bunch of different games. We've obviously also got the Fantasy Flight Star Wars X-Wing and Star Wars Legion.
Yep.
It looks like some of the collectible card games come along. We're just trying to firm those up now. And then we've also been fortunate enough to get a couple of very active and vocal and very supportive members of the community to work with us to sort out the role-playing section, so that we're going to have Adventurers League happening for Dungeons and Dragons. And
pretty exciting that we've got a con-created content for Adventurers League.
Yeah, which has been officially endorsed and whatnot now. So we're going to be essentially featuring a brand new module for Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League that's never been seen before, which is awesome. And so we do have to give a special thank you to Micah and to Matt for helping us wander down this road, because it's one that they're certainly more familiar than either of us.
Most definitely. And Micah from Pyromaniac Press actually wrote the D&D module for the con-created content. So
that's it's going to be really interesting this year with a more structured format for the RPGs and a lot of ability to kind of drop in and drop out of games so that you can do other things throughout the day, and you can...
Not necessarily drop in and drop out. What we're aiming for is to have shorter modules, so that you, like taster modules, so that you can just go and try a particular system for 20-25 minutes rather than having to commit
2-3 hours or more in some cases. So look, I mean, there's plenty going on. The show website is a separate one to the OBSEC page. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes if you want to go and check it out. And the players packs for all the tournaments are going up there. You can buy tickets through the links on there. We were really, I suppose, blown away when we published the note saying tickets are available. We sold like 30 tickets in the first couple of minutes, which I know for some particularly American listeners might sound like nothing, but it was a big deal for us.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate the fact that there are players out there who are hanging out for it, and as soon as they heard about it, went, "Yep, I'm there."
Yeah.
So it was really exciting for us. Have we got anything else I've forgotten?
No, just get on board and help us smash the record for Shadespire.
Absolutely. And look, by that stage we should have...
Oh, we've also got painting workshops happening as well.
Oh, yeah, we've got all the hobby skills workshops. We've got airbrush demos and airbrush paints. We've got Games Workshop coming on board and hosting a whole bunch of different masterclasses, including by Golden Demon winner Dean Lecoq, who's Perth local. He's going to come along and do some masterclass. Which also got Ghislaine Patel, who we mentioned earlier in this introduction, doing a whole bunch of hobby workshops as well. She's a very talented artist as well, and I don't think we actually got great video of her death guard, sadly. We might have to get that army back and get some photos.
I did get photos. I just can't remember where I put them. But
So,
there's going to be other hobby skills workshops.
Aiden,
They are
the local guy, Aiden's going to be running some workshops. So we're going to have something for everyone in terms of skill level and ability, and a whole bunch of...
That's certainly what we're aiming for anyway.
Yeah, we're going to. You keep telling me you say we're doing it, so we're doing it.
No, we are.
But it's going to be really exciting that we're going to take what we did last year and expand on it, and we're getting a lot of support this year from the community and from retailers and businesses who now want to get on board and see this grow. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, exciting.
All right. Well, since we've chewed up about 15 or 20 minutes of an hour episode, my butt, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to talk What You See Is What You Get. Right, so we're going to talk WYSIWYG, or What You See Is What You Get. Now, we've probably talked about this a little bit in the live streams.
We've talked about it a lot.
But recently, though, it's become another topic, and it's one that's not just about modelling anymore. It
does seem to be growing, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's certainly something that, working with some of the guys to sort out the ATC, the 40k ATC this year, we've had questions around it off the back of last year. And there was some concerns about how it was used at the last year's event. So with us managing it this year, we've kind of jumped in front of it to try and make sure that we're setting the expectations early.
It's interesting because I'm not sure as I've actually made my mind up about what my opinion is on it yet. So let's see at the end of this 35-minute segment whether I've made my mind up.
So most gamers should be familiar with What You See Is What You Get based on the modelling aspect of the hobby. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean...
What you see is what you get.
Yeah, the model model that you're putting on the table is representative of what it is armed with, what it is, and what it is in regards to your army. Mm-hmm. So if your Space Marine is holding a melter gun, then he has a melter gun. If he's holding a missile launcher, he has a missile launcher. If he's just got a bolter, he's got a bolter. And the same goes for any of the fantasy games, things like Kings of War, and to a lesser extent, Age of Sigmar have a similar situation where you can mix and match weapons in some units, and you can end up with a situation where, like I've just learnt with the Daughters of Cain, you can give them, like the Witch Elves can either have 2 knives or they can have a knife and a buckler shield.
I really had to stop myself going, and a fork?
There's sacrificial knives and forks then. So it's important. And I suppose before we delve too far into this, we're talking match play, organised play at this moment in time, from an organiser's point of view.
That's right. And I've mentioned before that we've had games here where when players have been, and when I'm saying players, your friends have been trialling new armies, they've had they've had pictures of the models cut out on paper and stuck to 5-cent pieces.
Yeah.
And they have, and I guess they are still what you see is what you get, because you really do see them. But, so we're not talking about when you're playing with friends in your back room or in your garage. We're talking about when you come to an organised match play event. Yeah.
So to cover off on the WYSIWYG within, it all comes down to that social contract. So when you're playing with your mates, there's always an understanding there of what you're doing. And if you turn up with, like my Harlequins, when I was playing with them, trying to figure out what weapons I'm going to use on the next army, okay, all of them are armed with this. Doesn't matter what you see, they're all armed with this. And, all of my mates didn't have a problem with that.
As long as you're clear beforehand.
Yeah.
You can't go in and go, oh, well, now that one's armed with...
And the same goes for pickup games at clubs or at stores. I think a lot of the time, as long as you have that quick conversation at the start of the game and go, hey, man... Or
a quick conversation when you're organising the game, I think is useful. To go, hey, you know what, I actually don't have... I want to try fielding 3 rhinos, but I actually don't have any rhinos. So
I'm going to use my Razorbacks or I'm going to use my Whirlwinds, which are basically the same.
Are you okay if I use that as a substitute?
Yeah.
And that actually gives your opponent the chance to go, actually, no, that doesn't sit okay with me.
Yeah. And at that point, you can then work through that process with them. you don't really get to do that in organised play scenarios because ultimately it's the tournament organiser who sets that expectation and sets that social contract for you. You're turning up and playing a predetermined opponent, whether that's by software or random draw or whatever it is, and you are both abiding by the rules within that social contract that the organisers have set down, hopefully in a player's pack. And I think that's where we have to kind of start talking more about WYSIWYG in that context, because all up until that point, you can make those determinations with your opponent together.
Yeah.
As soon as you hit a play point with a tournament, well, your hands are kind of tied. So, in terms of modelling, I don't think it's a new thing to have what you see is what you get at most events. I know that
It certainly doesn't seem new to me.
I know there are events that take it more strictly than others. We tend to be fairly strict on it with our events.
We do. However, you're very big with a rule of cool as well.
Yeah.
So, there is that.
There are acceptable.
There's a bit of grey, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So to give an example, and this is one I was actually talking about today with a player. He likes to field Khorne Blood Reavers from Age of Sigmar, and they have an axe in one hand and a sword in the other. And he likes to field them as Chaos Space Marine cultists for his 40k army. So he puts them on the correct size bases. They are big models. They're a lot bigger than... Well, they're not a lot bigger, but they're significantly bigger than the standard cultist models, who tend to be sort of scrawny and hunched over. These are big muscle-bound Conan the Barbarian types.
So they're kind of Captain America after the treatment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're meant to be armed with a close combat weapon of some kind and an auto pistol. He likes to say they're armed with a close combat weapon, i.e. a sword, and their axes count as throwing axes, and such. They are the auto pistols in inverted commas. They're roughly the right size. They're man-sized models. They're on the right size base. Is that acceptable? And for me, generally speaking, that's a yes, as long as it's consistent. And that's a case of...
Every single one of those on the table is that model.
Yeah, and like I say, the model doesn't deviate far enough from what it should be to be confusing. You'll see these guys running around in loincloths with fur boots and helmets. They're quite clearly not Chaos Space Marines. They're quite clearly not demons. You can kind of make that connection, and sadly we've had situations where those same models have been used for guys carrying auto guns, which are rifles. And at that point, I say no, because you're no longer holding a rifle-shaped device. You're quite clearly holding what are combat weapons, not a gun. One of the things I do encourage with that particular player is he finds holstered pistols and just glues them to the hips of the model. So that way he does have a smattering of handguns kind of spread out through the unit. And that helps sort of delineate what they are. It's a funny one, though, because you've got to be, I suppose, selective in how it's applied, because applying it strictly means that you have to use the models as they come with what they are, and you have to make sure that you only use the right guns with only the right bits and pieces. And that's a fairly large stifle on a lot of people's creativity.
Yeah, that's it.
Now, I'll go to the Harlequins because they're an example I'm working on at the moment. I'm building mine so that the right models have fusion pistols, the right models have Harlequins Caresses, the right models have Harlequins Embraces, they're armed, the guns are all correct on the vehicles. I'm going to a lot of effort there, and I did it with my Dark Elder before that, and I've done it with my Emperor's Children before that. And for me, that's a very, very important part of building an army, because I like it to be transparent. I like it to have an opponent walk up to it and know what they're looking at straight away. In the case of the Harlequins, you only get 2 Harlequins Caresses per box set of 6. And you basically want to have just about every one of them armed with that weapon. Same with the fusion pistols. You get 2 per box. There's 6 models in a box, and you probably want 4 or 5 of those 6 to be armed with them. At what point do you... obviously, the other pistols are shuriken pistols. They're a very different looking weapon. If you modify those pistols and change the barrel and cut the clip off and actually try and make an effort to make them look like fusion pistols, is that enough? Yes, because there is an active effort there to make them look like what they should be, so that they're deliberately not what they started off as, if that makes sense. And that's one of the ways that Harlequin players have been getting around some of the shortages of weapons, is using what's in the box and cutting it and converting it and turning it into something. Because the bits are just extortion on eBay.
Yeah.
So in terms of modelling, I think a lot of it comes down to effort and consistency in terms of what you see is what you get.
The biggest one for me is the consistency.
Yeah. So if you just,
consistency and transparency.
Yeah. And I've having this conversation with people and they go, well, why would you even bother? Like, what's the point? If I go up to someone, I give them my army list at a tournament, they can see what's on the army list and they know. And I said, no, it's easy to miss that.
And not only that, like if you think about Masters, it's a 2-day event where they're big games. There's a lot of games. If you're doing that in your last game at the end of
day two,
the players are absolutely shattered.
Oh, look, I having played 3 days at LVO.
Yeah. Even like one day for First Blood, was that 5 games?
Yeah, it was 5 games.
By the halfway through the 4th game, I thought half those players were going to fall over. So
pump them up with energy drinks, they were fine.
I think that might have been part of the problem. But anyway, so to be having to go, okay, show me your army list again so I can work out that's got this particular
this weapon or that
weapon. But is that what it's actually got, or has it got something else? And no, you need to make not necessarily an idiot's proof, but it needs to be as easy as possible for your opponent.
Yeah, and so when I essentially said that as my response is that it's to make the game...
It's always nice when we're on the same page, isn't it?
It's to make the game easier for both players. Yep. The response I got was, well, it's easy to read an army list. What if I don't know what the weapons actually are? Like if you write Harlequin's Caress and Harlequin's Embrace on your army list, I don't know what they mean. And I said, well, so it's important that I can tell you that. And he said, yeah, but it doesn't matter because you've written it down. As long as you tell me what the weapon does, it doesn't matter. And I went, well, how about I tell you what it does, but then I can identify them on the table for you so that you know what you're looking at.
That's right.
And even if you don't remember the names...
You know what that particular...
You know that each of those models is armed with this, that, and the other. And you can ask that question again and again and again and again and again as much as you like throughout the game. But when you look at the table and you're trying to make decisions... and you see that there's a group of them with these bulbous brass-coloured pistols, and there's a bunch of them which are silver pistols. If I start the game off and explain to you the difference between a shuriken pistol and a fusion pistol, and if you're looking for them in the army, all of the gold ones are fusion pistols and all of the silver ones are shuriken, you can start making that decision without having to ask me, hey, what's that unit got armed with? Because you've got that in your head. You might not know the intricacies of the weapons, but you'll at least have a starting point to start making decisions. And it speeds the game up because of it. So, like what I said... I just want to quickly touch on that one of the things that I do try and remind and encourage players is that in the time where they're, when matchups have just happened and you've got that little bit of time when you're talking through the army list, it's okay to ask those questions. Absolutely.
And I think sometimes people feel a little bit intimidated and they don't necessarily feel comfortable going, hey, what does this do? What are the rules around this? So it's completely okay to ask that. So if you don't know the difference between those two weapons, ask.
Absolutely. I think some people get it in their heads that a tournament player should know all the bits and pieces.
Everything. Yeah.
I still walk into games with armies that I play less than regularly and go, I don't remember the rule. I know vaguely what it does, but give me a crash course because hopefully it'll trigger something in my memory and I'll remember it once we get underway.
I'm just going to clarify that. You walk in with an army that you know how you're playing your army. It's when you...
Yeah, it's with my opponent's
when your
army.
Opponent plays an army that you don't play that regularly. Just wanted to clarify, you don't rock up at tournaments and go, oh, I've got this new army and I don't really know what it does.
I've only done that once.
I'm trying to dig you out of a hole here. You just keep on digging.
No, look, you're right. It's about... a great example is playing Imperial Astra Militarum. I almost said the dreaded IG words. I've played...
I didn't pick you up when you called it Dark Eldar earlier, however many times either.
They are Dark Eldar, shush.
Just letting you know that I let that one go.
I played them a lot over the years, particularly in older editions of the game with a couple of very close friends, and Danger Rod, who's helps us out with terrain and bits and pieces for the website and Facebook.
He hasn't written a blog post in I don't know how long. Like seriously.
Anyway, he plays one of his primary armies, so I've got a passing knowledge of what they do and how they operate, and I know roughly what the guns do, and I know roughly what I'm dealing with. But every time I play them at a tournament, I have to stop at the start of the game and go, cool. you got orders. How do they work in this version of the game? Because I've played them from sort of 3rd edition all the way through,
onwards.
and you end up with a slightly different rule set each edition. And I remember most of it, but then you go, I'm going to do this with orders, and I have to go, no, you're going to have to step me through that because I didn't. You've got to start at the start. What's the range? How does it work? What do you have to roll? What does it do? Do you have to resolve it straight away, or do you go and do multiples? You step me through the process.
Mm-hmm.
And once we've done it the first time,
it's all good.
It's fine because it picks up something and I go, okay, cool, I remember how that works now. Not a problem. So, and it's the same for WYSIWYG. If you start the game as you're deploying, putting your models on the table and you go, okay, cool, this is my unit of...
Deployment was the word I was looking for earlier. Thanks for that.
I'm putting my unit of 12 Harlequins on the table and I go, cool, there's 4 models that have Harlequins Caresses, 4 that have Harlequins Blades, and 4 that have Harlequins Embraces. These are the blades, and I pick up one of each. These are the blades, these are the embraces, these are the caresses. There are 6 fusion pistols and 6 shuriken pistols. This is what those look like. And then deploy the unit. And at least that way there's a level of transparency at the start of the game, so there's no gotcha moments. And your opponent has the opportunity to ask questions at that moment as well. So, in terms of stats on the guns or whatever they do. I'm a big proponent of WYSIWYG for tournaments.
I think we're both on the same page as far as WYSIWYG for modelling goes for tournaments, was specifically for the tournaments that we run anyway.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think the fact is that when you have 2 players who potentially have never met each other, if your army list is correct and you share those with each other, and the models are correct, it makes the game less likely to cause fusses and arguments. So I can't come up with... I mean, other than cost, which I suppose is the downside to WYSIWYG, which we've kind of touched on with... Like I was using the Harlequins as the example. And I've seen a few people say that it's a cash grab from Games Workshop. And it's a hard call to make with that because, unfortunately, the box sets that exist in the present game were made in past editions, a lot of them. So you are dealing with a situation where the company's perspective and how it interacts with its customers has changed.
Very much so.
Which means that, like I said, with the Harlequins, you don't quite get enough weapons and options in that to do what you need to with the unit. Is that a deliberate thing? Probably. I don't think it is. It is obviously to some degree, but I also think it's to do with the game designers having a slightly romanticized version of the armies that people should be playing, and they fit within the stories. And not every Harlequin's running around with a dagger and then a fusion pistol because they're not anti-tank hunters. They're warrior troubadours that should be getting into close combat and fighting up close and with fancy weapons, whereas most Harlequins run around with what are essentially anti-tank guns and very rarely into combat unless they have to, because in the game mechanics that makes sense, but that's not the way the stories play out. And I think that that's kind of part of the disconnect. So I've seen a lot of people with, when I've been talking about my Harlequins, going, just magnetize them all. Put magnets in them. Yeah, that's not happening. It's never happening. The Harlequins are so fiddly and so spindly that putting magnets in each of them in their arms and then...
Might be a little bit tricky.
It's more, in my opinion, it's more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah, and so that's a decision that you're making. Everyone has choices to make. So you know that you are choosing to give them these weapons, and you're stuck with that for the
unless I
cut
cut them off.
Yeah. Which, let's be honest with you, that's never going to happen. No. So you're choosing to stick with these for the
my
length of
last
time.
Harlequin army did get some updates where I did cut the pistols off them and replace them with fusion pistols because I had 2 squads that didn't have any.
And why was that?
Because I needed 2 in each squad.
Yeah.
And they didn't, and those models did come with them at the time because they're the current plastic kits. Ironically enough, I didn't use the genuine kits. I went and got I went and got Drakari Dark Elder blast.
No, it is Drakari.
Blast pistols because I have a million of those from my Dark Elder army.
Yeah,
they're basically the right size. They're very similar. They're just the Dark Elder version of the Eldar gun, and I didn't check which hands the pistols were in compared to the Harlequins, so I cut the Harlequins off at the wrist, cut the Dark Elder off at the wrist, and realised that they were the matching. They were the wrong hands. Yeah. So I had to then cut the pistols off the hands and glue the hands back on the arms, and then put the guns on the hands, which was something I probably should have checked earlier. Yeah. But it meant that I updated that army.
That's because you're a big picture guy, isn't it?
It is. It's just those little details I just sometimes skip over.
Yeah, you do.
But it meant that now that the older Harlequin army now has two fusion pistols in each squad, which is good because it helps them. But it also means that I've got a bunch of spare fusion pistols from those units to put into my next Harlequin army, so they will be,
oh yay,
the right models.
Yeah.
But I do think that I can't come up with a good reason to not support the idea of WYSIWYG other than the convenience of players to not have to go to the effort. Like it's not a laziness thing, but it is in the same token. It's, I just want to play with the points and, the models become tokens at that point.
Yeah.
And they're not for me, I guess. They're more than that.
No, they're representative.
Yeah, so WYSIWYG is a big deal for us, and we do try and enforce it at tournaments. Obviously, we can't check every army, and we can't check it versus the list a lot of the time, and we rely on players flagging things that aren't quite right.
Which is another thing. That's totally cool. If you see an issue, you need to let us know, because we can't necessarily get to every table and check everything.
Even if we do, if
we don't know, that's it.
I mean, I'm familiar with a lot of the 40k range, miniature-wise, but there's still armies I don't play. There's still armies I don't collect.
Yes, but also I've never seen you go to one of the tournaments and go, show me your army list. Okay, I'm going to go through and check every single model has got the weapon on it. That so we have to go with, this is what you said you're bringing.
This is what you should.
This is what you
have
should
on
be
the table.
bringing.
Yeah.
And if your opponent isn't doing that, you have to let us know.
Yeah, and I think that goes for any organizer that says they're going to be using a what you say is what you get policy. If they've put it in a players pack or they've said that's the rule, and you're facing an opponent that hasn't met that criteria, complaining about it after the fact doesn't achieve anything.
After.
Whereas if you bring it up with the TO politely,
yeah, and
with a bit of respect for your opponent, and go, hey man, like your list says that you've got a melter gun in that squad, but that's a flamer. And if he says, it's a conversion of a flamer, and if you look at all my melter guns, they're all the same, and I've cut this off, and I've done that because I couldn't get enough melter guns, and they're all different, you can go, okay, cool, I get that.
Yeah, which I guess gives...
If they've just glued a flamer on...
Yeah, but it gives your opponent a chance to explain themselves, or it gives you a chance to actually talk through that, rather than you just walking away from a game...
Dobbing on you.
Well, no, but what I don't like is when a player walks away with a bad experience based on an assumption.
Yeah.
So rather than giving their opponent a chance to actually go, well, actually, no, you're right, it is the
incorrect... It looks like a flamer, but I've done
this, and this in order to make the changes so it is representative of this. And then you can go, oh, yeah, no, that I can see that, fair enough. Or, you know what, you've cut the end off. You haven't done anything. That's not enough to warrant that.
I've seen a few, when they were metal, the old metal Imperial Guard, Kazakin and Stormtroopers, and getting a plasma gun was really hard because there was one blister pack of them, and they came with one melter gun and one blister pack and a metal pack for like $18 for the pair. And you wanted 4 in a squad. And you only ever got 1 in the blister pack, which meant that
you have to buy a lot of blister packs.
You're buying 4 blister packs for 4 plasma guns. You've got 4 melter guns there that you're potentially not using.
Yeah.
And then your box set of 10, which came with a grenade launcher and a flamer, now has a bunch of models that you aren't using as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Brett, who I used to game with regularly before he moved to the East Coast, we got a bunch of plasma pistols and plasma guns, plastic ones, cut the ends off the Hell rifles, and then actually put the plasma nozzles, and they're quite distinctive in 40k, the plasma weaponry, put those on there and left all the power cabling that ran to the backpack and stuff. And as far as I'm aware, he never had a situation where someone said, hey, that's not a plasma gun. Because it was a distinctive enough shape and silhouette that it's a fairly iconic 40k weapon. I think you can also get away with it a little bit when it comes to a lot of the Xenos species in terms of their weapons. Like, I don't know how many players would be able to tell me the difference between a Dark Lance and a Disintegrator on a Drakari vehicle. I can. I know what they look like, and I still see really common mix-ups with regards to a lot of the Eldar weapons as well. So I think the Xenos armies might get away with it a little bit in regards to, oh no, that's totally a fusion weapon, or that's totally a Bright Lance, or because their opponent might not know any differently.
Yeah, but I really don't want to encourage players to assume ignorance
on
their opponent's behalf.
No, definitely not. But I think that I think there might be a perception of it being a bit easier to fly under that radar with Xenos armies. I mean, a Tyranid army that rolls up... I actually had this with one of our local players. He has a big Tyranid army with Gene Stealers, and he wanted to run them with the Scything Talon upgrade. And it's a 0-point upgrade. It's free.
Mm-hmm.
And he went, I don't have to model that, do I?
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, yeah, you do. And he went, what do you mean? And I went, well, the box set comes with 8 sets of Scything Talons and 8 sets of Rending Claws and 8 sets of just standard arms. You need to pick 2 of those 3 sets. And one of them has to be Rending Claws. So you've got normal arms or you've got Talons. If you want to run the Talons, like you say, there's 0 points. Glue them on. Away you go. And he was a bit taken aback by that at first. And like I said to him, it's about transparency. So if you've got 10 models, because there's 0 and not every model has to have them, if you've got 10 that do and 10 that don't, well, you've got 10 that do, 10 that don't.
10, yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's I think as long as you're consistent with how you apply it as an organizer and you enforce it, you can set expectations for the community. And look, if the community's not used to that level of strictness, I think your best bet is to actually start a little bit softly and give bonus points if your army is fully WYSIWYG, for example. So if you rock up to a tournament and say, okay, cool, at the end of the game when you're filling in your score sheet, if your army is 100% what you see is what you get, you'll get 2 bonus points for the round. And that means that there is an incentive there to make sure that the army's correct. Now, is that a little bit discriminatory? Well, I suppose it is.
Why is it discriminatory? I don't feel that at all.
Well, for players like me who have old armies, it can be hard to update metal armies, and it can be hard to update armies that you finished painting in the past that you can't necessarily colour match. But at the same time, exactly, it comes back to you having to be willing to accept the fact that your army might not be as optimal as you think it should be, and essentially either making the updates or not. And for those people who do choose to make that extra effort, then they're going to be rewarded for that. But let's talk about the colourful elephant in the WYSIWYG room.
Yeah, this is the one that I'm struggling with.
So, if you haven't noticed, most of the tournaments, and I feel like it's probably all bar one select group of tournaments around the world, for that matter, don't enforce a painting WYSIWYG. Now, what I mean by painting WYSIWYG is if you have painted your Space Marines as Ultramarines, they're Ultramarines. They're not Imperial Fists. They're not Raven Guard. They're not Blood Angels. They're Ultramarines.
The part where I struggle with this is... Sorry, I know I'm jumping ahead. But the part where I struggle with this is that in order for them to be Ultramarines, they're just a certain colour.
Yep, they are. So, to put this into context, most tournaments will not require that. Most tournaments, as long as the army list is correct and it's very clear that the weapons are all correct and the models are correct, how you paint your toy soldiers is completely up to you. So if you choose to do all the Romanesque style upgrades with all the head crests and all the rest of it from the Ultramarines, and you go down that road and you paint them up as Ultramarines, so they're all that blue and gold and they've got the white Ultimas on their shoulders and all the rest of it, and you go, you know what, I really want to run Kaivan Shrike from the Raven Guard. So you buy a Shrike and you paint him up in blue and he matches your army, and then you go, cool, I'm fielding them as Raven Guard today. And he's literally the only unique model there for the Raven Guard, and you turn up and you play them as Raven Guard. At the moment, 99% of tournaments are completely okay with that, because your army list is correct, the models are correct, what you paint them as doesn't matter. However, Warhammer World have elected for their next GT series, which starts, I think the first heat's very shortly, actually, because they run it financial year, have said that if you have painted your army in a recognised, published colour scheme that has a specific set of rules attached to that colour scheme, you must use those rules. Now, when you start talking about that, the first question is, well, what if I haven't got one of those? What if I've got my own colour scheme, my own custom craft world, my own hive fleet, whatever it happens to be? The answer to that question is, the rulebook says if you don't have a specific thing listed in the rulebooks, then you can pick your own. You can pick one of the existing ones and count it as.
Yeah.
So for all those players who want to be really creative and have their own colour schemes, they're largely unaffected. However, when we were talking about this prior to recording, we did come up with one little hurdle, which I'll kind of go into now, and I don't know enough about how that rule works for Warhammer World to say which way which side of the fence you fall on for this. But basically, if I paint my army Imperial Fists, no, actually that's not a good example. Let's go with a Sons of Omar colour scheme. It's my own homebrew chapter. It's got the Ultima symbol, but it's red.
Mm-hmm.
And because they've got no specified rules, I can pick them to be Ultramarines.
Mm-hmm.
So they follow the Ultramarines rules. If I keep their keyword as Ultramarines on the army list, that would then give me access to the Lord of War Reboot Guilliman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the way the book works, your keyword is actually Sons of Omar or whatever you've called them. But you use the rules for the Ultramarines. Now, this is best exemplified in the Space Marine book with the Crimson Fists, the Imperial Fists. The Imperial Fist rules are to do with fortifications and damage and buildings and that sort of stuff. The Crimson Fists are a successor chapter to the Imperial Fist. They have they literally use the Imperial Fists rules. And it says Imperial Fists, see Imperial Fists. Their keyword is still Crimson Fists, though. And they can't use Lysander, because Lysander has the Imperial Fist keyword, not the Crimson Fist keyword. But they can use Pedro Cantor, because he actually has the Crimson Fist keyword. Mm-hmm. So the question becomes, if I rock up with a homebrew chapter, am I in the same situation as that, where my Sons of Omar is the keyword I get? So even though I'm using the Ultramarines rules, I can't access Reboot Guilliman, because Reboot Guilliman's keyword is Ultramarines, and mine technically, even though I use the same rule set, mine isn't. And that instantly only really encourages players to use the Codex colour schemes to kind of access some of those units that are unique, that are really good, that you want to use in those style armies. And
that then leads to people being pigeonholed with how they get to
and potentially penalised in a tournament environment, because you're essentially having to make a decision on how you're painting them based on the rules you want to use, not necessarily any creative choice.
Exactly, and that's where that's, I guess, for me, where I really struggle. I've talked a lot about the importance of the hobby elements to the events that we run, and really wanting to make sure that we keep some of those hobby elements. And for me, this feels a little bit like we'd be losing those. See,
it's funny, because the people who I've seen...
I can see it both ways. This is why I'm struggling to get my head straight, because down one side, I'm like, it reduces that creativity of people being able to kind of, create their own schemes. But then the other side of me goes, yes, but if they're sticking with the hobby and they're following
the stories and the
law, then they're going to want to paint it this way.
It should match,
Yeah, so that's why, like I said at the beginning, I'm really struggling to work out where my opinion is on this, because I'm just not sure.
So we don't enforce the painting WYSIWYG at the moment, and I can't see us doing it in the foreseeable future either.
Definitely not, because if I can't work out whether or not I'm for it or against it.
But a great example is we have a player here in Perth who has a beautiful Imperial Fists Space Marine army, and it's got Lysander in it, and it's all painted up bright yellow with all the proper markings, and it's Imperial Fist shoulder pads and everything. And he approached me and said, hey, if I go and buy Rogel Dawn from Forge World, the Primarch model, and make sure he's on the right size base, and make sure he's roughly the same height and shape as the plastic Ultramarines Reboot Guilliman, can I use my Imperial Fists army with the Rogel Dawn model as Ultramarines with Reboot Guilliman? Because there are no rules for Rogel Dawn in 40k, but I want to use my core model. And when I answered that question 6 months ago, the answer was sure. Because ultimately I can't dictate to you how you get to paint your toy soldiers. And you want to use a core model. And you've thought about it, and the model's roughly the right size and on the right base, and it's very clear as to who it is and what it is.
Yeah.
Go for it. But you couldn't do that at Warhammer World.
No. And I guess I'll be interested to see how this actually works for them. Because...
And look, if they did it for this season, for the 17-18 season, and you've played, I'd be really interested to hear if that was a thing already. I don't believe it was, but you end up in a really weird space, because I I'll use the Craft Worlds for the Eldar as an example because they're I know that variable.
Yeah.
I rock up with my Ulthway army. Now, Ulthway is black and bone, typically.
Mm-hmm.
I like to use red as an offset colour as well, whereas Sly Dave, who I played a game with his Craft World Order, uses purple instead of red.
Mm-hmm.
So if we rock up and we don't match the colour scheme in the Codex, and neither of us do exactly, does that mean neither of us is playing Ulthway, and therefore we can't use Eldrad Ulthran because he is a named character for Ulthway?
Or if you've got...
Or is it close enough is good enough?
That's exactly it. If your main colours are black and bone and you're sticking with the main colours and you've only got, I guess, your accent colour being the purple or the red, are you, is 90% close enough?
Yeah. And
Where's the line drawn?
I think for things like Space Marines where you tend to have a very singular, distinct colour scheme, and they have a very singular, distinct logo, it's very easy to say, well, they're blue and they've got the Ultima symbol on them. They're Ultramarines.
And that symbol is in this colour.
Well, even the symbol changes colour depending on the company markings, potentially. So if they're blue and they use gold and white and they've got the Ultima logo, they're Ultramarines.
Yeah.
If I, again, going back to Harlequins, because that's where my brain is for 40k at the moment, there's a colour scheme there called the Mask of the Endless Dance.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Dance Without End, whichever, there's a few variations on the name, but it's the same mask. The artwork for them is in dark green, light green, with purple and like a sky blue as two sort of accent colours.
Mm-hmm.
But when you read the description of them, in the same book, with a different piece of art beside that description, it says magenta, not purple. And when you look at the painted version of it, it's different again.
Yeah.
At what point...
But they have... that's got different legging patterns with it as well, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And there's no necessarily markings for them specifically.
Yeah.
But... and that's kind of where I'm going, is where is that line actually drawn? Does it have to match the Codex explicitly, or does it have to be instantly recognisable, but you can put your own personal twists on it? And it's easier for some armies than others.
Yeah, and even that, I think, okay, I guess that feels like it's sitting okay. But I also think it's really restricting the way that players can play with with an army.
Well, there's one more hurdle that I can throw in here, and that's for the Astra Militarum. So they've just recently pulled all of the alternate guard regiments off of their website. So now you can only buy Catachan Jungle Fighters and Cadian Shock Troops, the two regiment models you can buy. All the others are now gone. Mm-hmm. Now, a friend of ours who I play regularly, Dizzy's army is all Steel Legion. He's been collecting them since 3rd edition. He's got more than enough. That's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I see so many players wanting to use Talan Desert Raiders, as their chosen regiment. Now, they've never been released in plastic. They were only ever metal. You had to buy them in boxes of 10. They were really expensive, even when they were sort of phasing them out. And you can't buy them anymore. So if I, as a new guard player today, says I want to play Talan Desert Raiders, I've got to either buy Catachan Jungle Troop models or Cadian Shock Troop models. So the models themselves technically delineate the regiment, because they are distinctly different. There's no models for the Talan available anymore. Is me painting a Cadian Shock Troop in the sandy desert colours of Talan enough to say I can use the Talan rules, or am I expected to then try and source recast models or secondhand models off eBay to try and put that army together to put it on the table? You don't actually produce models to let me even use the regiment rules, technically. So, and the guard regiments have always been visually distinctive, not just by paint job, but by physical style. It'd be like running Eldar Guardians as...
So now you're just confusing both of the elements of WYSIWYG.
Exactly. So it's in my mind, a guardsman is a guardsman. Whether it's a bare-armed Rambo-style Catachan or whether it's a more traditional military uniform like the Cadians have. But if I paint one of them in a desert colour scheme and one of them in a bright red colour scheme, does that mean I get to use the red ones as Vostrians and the desert ones as Talan? Because I can't buy either of those models anymore. So they're armed correctly. They're on the right size base. They're the right size model.
So by the WYSIWYG modelling rules,
they meet all those requirements.
Meet all the requirements.
But how do you play that out? How do you go to Like, if I submitted an army list to Warhammer World with a Vostrian army, rocked up with my red Cadians, and they went, yeah, no, mate, you can't use those. They're not Vostrians. You have to use them as Cadians. It wouldn't bar me from the event, but it fundamentally changes the way the army plays, because the rules attached to the Vostrians are different to the rules that are attached to the Cadians. So, yeah, I don't know how you enforce that painting requirement. I don't know how you can enforce what you see is what you get painting for some armies, or a Tyranid Hive fleet. Like, they're bugs. People paint them in all sorts of eclectic colours, and they're fortunate they don't really have any sort of special characters that would be impacted by it, because you can put any bug into any list. So they're probably the least affected by this. Same with things like Genestealer, Colt, and Harlequins, who have no named characters, so to speak, that would be tied to those. Whereas my Dark Eldar don't have a colour scheme in the Codex, so I just pick what I wanted, and they've got no named characters that it affects, so that's fine as well.
Yeah.
But the second I want to use my Lilith Hesperax model, who's painted to match my army, I can't, because she's not painted Cult of Strife.
Yeah.
So I just don't know how to reconcile that.
And at the moment, I feel like we don't necessarily have enough information to make an informed decision about it, and that's why my thoughts are that we don't enforce the WYSIWYG as far as painting goes.
No, we've already said that.
Yeah, and we actually just write it out and see what happens at Warhammer World with how they do actually enforce it, and how they're finding that that's affecting players, and hearing some play. That's tricky as well, hearing players' experience, because what I've seen talking to international players versus talking to Australian players, they have very different expectations and understandings and experiences of tournament events anyway. So it's really hard to make that.
Well, and you throw that into a Warhammer World dynamic where you're going to the heart of the game, and you're going to play at a tournament knowing that that's a thing. I almost think that the majority of players you'd speak to would be just overwhelmingly like, it was fine, I don't care.
Yeah.
Because I got to play at a tournament at Warhammer World, and I got to see all this amazing stuff.
Well, I don't know. Do you think that because you live in Australia and Warhammer World is so
it's not something you can visit.
It's so inaccessible.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if you live in London,
Nottingham.
Obviously, if you live in Nottingham, then it's nice and close. And even London, it's only a couple of hours drive, which for us...
About 4 or something, isn't it? 4 or 5?
Oh, look, I barely know how far it is for us to get from here to Carousel.
From memory, it's about 4 or 5. So it's like our drive to Albany.
Yeah, but it's doable.
Oh, look, the guys from Tabletop Tactics, Lawrence and the crew, they go to the GTs at Warhammer World. They are based in London.
Yeah.
And you see the photos that they publish on Tabletop Tactics where it's a nighttime drive and a very early morning drive.
Yeah.
So...
But it's a different mentality about driving in the UK than it is here as well.
Yeah.
But my point is that if it's a lot more accessible there, do you think that it still has that same...
Is it less special?
Yeah, exactly. Do you think it's still, I don't care what it is, I'll do whatever because I'm playing at Warhammer World? Or do you think that because in order for us to play at Warhammer World, it's a 19-hour flight and a minimum
2 or 3 hour drive at least from Manchester?
Well, no, I was actually thinking it's a minimum of $3,000.
Yeah, well, that is true as well.
So it's not like a 3 hour drive and a couple of £100.
Yeah. Look, I think that there's a level of fanboy that is going to be present and local that aren't going to care as well. They're going to be the collectors, and then they're going to be the full-on hobbyists that will go to these events without that care. It'll be, I'm going because it's Warhammer World and I love Games Workshop and I want to be part of that. Then you have the guys who are competitive tournament players but are also passionate hobbyists who are willing to make the sacrifices required to get the right stuff to play and meet those standards. Now, if that means because Games Workshop isn't fulfilling a need within the community, they go recast or they go to eBay and pay scalpers prices for the particular models they need, I think that those sorts of players will do that. I think that if I desperately needed to run, like I need 10 more Talan infantry to make up my platoon that I can then field my army, I'll scour eBay, I'll go to the buy swap sells on Facebook, I will do whatever it takes, and I will pay what I need to pay to get the models that I need, because I want to play at this event.
Mm.
But I also think it's a massive barrier to entry because looking at some of the comments that we saw online, there are plenty of players who went, if you try and enforce that, no, I just wouldn't come.
Okay, I actually haven't seen anything online, so I'm...
Oh, there's a Facebook group I saw it posted in about. So
Okay.
there were plenty of players...
blind as far as that goes.
No, there were plenty of players who were basically going, no, you try and tell me how to paint my toy soldiers, I'm not going to go.
And that's pretty much what I think. You know, like we're already telling players that they have to paint their models in order to play at our events. We're already saying that it needs to look finished from 3 feet away. Like it needs to be on the right base. And we put on a lot of restrictions, and to add another restriction to that...
It's just another barrier to entry at that point.
Yeah, here I am, I don't know how long ago now, 35, 40 minutes ago, saying how we're trying to create this soft entry point for new players and trying to make it, reduce some of those barriers and get it so that people feel that they're welcome into the tournament scene. But you must do this and you must do this and you must do this. And if you don't jump through that hoop, then you're not welcome. And, those two things don't sit well with me.
So that's kind of my point, is that with only Warhammer World, as far as I'm aware...
I knew it was your point. I was just confirming that I thought the same thing. It's all good. We're on the same team here.
I know. It does become a situation of...
Are you going to finish the point anyway?
Carry
on.
Yeah, it comes down to less about the tournament and more about the experience. If they want to create a situation that is still hobby centric, because ultimately it's still part of the hobby to try and make sure you...
Do you think it's more... Sorry to cut you off there, but do you think it's more like we've been talking about narrative events? Do you think it fits more with those narrative events?
Absolutely. I think there's a much stronger argument to have it that way for a narrative style day where you are recreating stories from the past, or where you're continuing a story from the current game, to argue that no, you have to build an army a certain way and you have to have it look a certain way to meet those narrative needs. And I think we see a lot of that in the Horus Heresy games, where the guys have got 18 legions to choose from, and if you rock up with something that's not one of those 18 legions, it just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Because the game, particularly in recent, sort of the last 6 to 12 months, with the changes in what's happened at Games Workshop, the game has very much moved away from any sort of competitive scene to a firm narrative focus where... And a lot of the tournaments is the wrong word, but a lot of the events were doing that before that anyway. But certainly what I've seen locally is that it's more about playing those cool scenarios and recreating stuff, as opposed to just putting them on the table and blowing shit up.
It's interesting, though, because some of the historic wargaming, it's to the finest detail.
Yeah, make sure the boots are the right colour and the lapels are the right colour.
Not even that. Like, with some of the tanks with the camouflage, it's how much of the green is there, like the ratio of green to brown with the, how big can the spot of green be versus how big can the little stripy bit of brown that goes around the green.
Technical terminology there.
I don't know. I was just thinking I have no idea how to describe that, but it's like it's all...
The right camouflage patterns with the right...
To the right, and it's scaled down to the right millimetre. And so we're definitely not seeing that in 40k and Age of Sigmar and even 30k.
Well, there was one of the Games Workshop store managers here, Rye, who is a good friend of ours. His Stormcast Eternals are in like a jade green. I don't know, jade's the right word. It's probably darker than jade, but it's like a sea, like a dark sea green. Beautiful paint job on them. They look fantastic.
Is it teal? Is it teal green?
I don't think it's teal. I don't think teal's a colour.
Teal is a colour.
Anyway, it's like saying aubergine's a colour. It's bloody purple. I
can't believe you're an artist and you actually think that aubergine is the same colour as purple.
Anyway.
Oh my goodness.
There's a set of rules for that particular colour scheme for the Stormcast.
Okay, we're back to the...
Yeah, we're still on that focus there.
Yep.
They're close, but they're not the exact colour scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, we're back to, I don't know he necessarily set out to paint them that before. They might have painted them before they started them, before they had rules.
Yeah.
And we're in the same boat with a lot of the 40k armies. Armies cycle in and out in terms of rules for 40k, for Age of Sigmar. I'm sure they will as well for colour schemes. I've just been through it with the Daughters of Cain, where I went, I'm going to read this story. Oh, I really like that story about them. What's their colour scheme? Magenta and blood. Okay, but the photo's pink.
Hmm.
And you're going, well, hang
How much
on.
of that is to do with poor printing?
Well, it's a decent, like, standard.
Mm.
But hang on a minute, is it magenta or is it pink? And if I turn up with magenta
And it's supposed to be pink.
and it's supposed to be pink, is that, like,
Yeah.
or if I change the tone of the pink?
Mm.
So, I don't know. I just don't know how you can possibly put boundaries on this. So,
And yet they have.
but I'm really, really interested to see how they police it and how they manage that, because, like, as an Australian, if we'd flown over to to time it with a GT heat for me to play, at this point in time, I'd be sending them photos, going, "Here is my army, here is my Ulthway Eldar. Is this going to be okay for me to use as Ulthway so I can run Eldrad, or?"
It'll be interesting to see how strict they are and
Yeah.
how much they police that. I know when you played, and I won't say which particular event it was, but when you played in one international event, you went through something similar of going through and reading the players pack and seeing that this particular level of painting needed to be adhered to, and if it wasn't at, and it was a really high level of painting, and if it wasn't at that particularly high level of painting, then it would be taken off the table and all of that kind of thing. And you were, taking it seriously. And you did send them through photos, is this going to be okay? And then you got there and there's bare plastic models.
Yeah.
So, is it, in an ideal world, this is what we'd like to see? Or is it, if you're not painting this to the minute detail, then the model comes off the table, or you're playing with a different set of rules?
Or is it somewhere in between?
Well, yeah.
So
There are, ranges to that scale, not just two opposing
yes
ends.
or no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I struggle with it. I really like the idea of having it match. My undiagnosed OCD says that if they look like an Ultramarine, they're Ultramarines, and if they look like an Imperial Fist, they're Imperial Fists. But at the same time,
That's not OCD, just for people who do actually have
I know. That's why I said it's
diagnosed mental health issues. That's not OCD, and we're not making light of that.
No, of course not. But
That's my little
my
post-service
obsessive,
announcement.
my sort of mentality is if it looks like that, it should be that.
Yeah.
And that's my personal take on the hobby. I'm not going to enforce that view on anyone else, because that's not what their view is.
We just watched I just watched with my two girls an episode of a TV show called Nailed It, and which is quite hilarious. But anyway, and one of the things that he said on there is, like, if you're going to do pink butter icing, make it taste like strawberry or raspberry, and it's that same kind of thing.
Yeah.
That if you're going to show it to me like that, make it actually be representative of what it actually is.
As opposed to pink icing that tastes like blueberries, or...
Well, actually, it was pink icing that just tasted like buttercream. But anyway.
But yeah, that's kind of the thought process I have with it, is that if I look across the table and I see Ultramarines...
You're expecting to be playing Ultramarines.
That's my expectation. Now, I understand that players will go, no, hang on, dude. They're actually salamanders, and these are the rules I'm using. And you go, oh, okay, cool. But it doesn't stop a level of expectation when you walk up to the table going, oh, okay, cool. I know what this does.
I mean, it's that level of expectation when you're walking up to the table, but also, for me, it would be repeatedly through the game as well. Like, just struggle to hold on to things like that and go, oh, yeah, no, that's not right. They're playing it as salamanders. Like, yeah.
So I think WYSIWYG modelling-wise is, in my opinion, for
Quite
events... for any sort of organised play should, in my opinion, just be a yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we're at a point within the community that can be a reasonable expectation for painting. And I know that it's essentially the same thing, because you should be modelling what you want to model and painting what you want to paint. But one has a very direct impact on the rules of a tournament, and the other less so, in theory. Even though I've just said that statement, I actually disagree with it now.
Is there... Okay, so... I've told you I struggle to hold on to details. Just about 2 or 3 minutes ago, you spoke about Ultramarines versus Salamanders, right? Now, is there ever a time where they would definitely have different arms, as in different weapons?
No, because they're both Space Marines.
Okay.
So there's no unique like the army list is the same.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking.
There's a handful of like relics, and like the shoulder pad iconography will be different, and little things.
Yeah.
And one of the counter arguments to, like, I've seen people going, "Oh, it's ridiculous that you can have Ultramarines and they're using the Salamanders rules." To which my counter argument is, are you telling me that 1,000 Special Forces super soldiers can't deploy in a manner that is reminiscent of the typical way a Salamander's army fights? Are you telling me that they're so hyper-specialised that they can't fight any other way? Or is it plausible that an elite fighting formation can deploy as needed and achieve the same result? And it's the same with the Eldar craft worlds. Just because the Siamhan craft world is known for fielding a swarm of jet bikes, it's a world. There are billions of Eldar. Does that not mean that the Ulthway craft world, even though they're not known for all their jet bikes, are you seriously telling me that they couldn't deploy a big Windrider host of all their bikes and skimmers the way Siamhan do? It might not be the way that it might not be in the frequency, but it could be done. And you can apply that logic all through every single army, because just because that's the way they typically fight and the rules represent that's the way they only fight.
Particular battle.
Yeah, so, and that's always been my justification for saying, you know what, they look like Ultramarines, but they're playing Salamanders. Because this particular junction in time, the Ultramarines have gone, we need to show up with a bunch of flamers and a bunch of melter guns like the Salamanders usually do. Hey, has anyone gone and worked with them before? Yeah, we have. Awesome, dudes. Let's everyone go and get your flamers and let's go and have some fun.
Yeah.
And that's a fairly logical... I mean,
that makes sense.
In modern military, the special forces arm and equip to do what they need to do. They don't all carry M4s and don't give them up because, well, we got issued an M4, so that's what we shoot with. It doesn't work that way. They get given the tools to do the mission, not...
That's it.
Not the other way around. So it kind of makes sense to me.
And I don't think that they change their uniform depending on
no.
what kind of battle they're going into this week.
Well, maybe a little bit. Going from a desert to a jungle are two different camo schemes.
That is true, but I don't think that necessarily is related to the tactics that they will be employing. I think that that's more to do with...
Well, that's it. If they're going in Navy SEAL style and they need wetsuits, they're going to wear wetsuits.
Yeah, but I don't think we're at a point where we go, you know what, if you're playing on a snow table, I expect all of your army to be painted with snow camouflage.
No, that's true.
So, although, that could be dedication.
Well, it just means you have to have your own table for every single game, drag it around with you going, yep, we're playing on the snowboard, guys. Why? Because my army matches.
That's it. Either that or you've got to bring, I think we've got 8 different styles of tables, so you've got to bring the same army 8 times. Maybe not. All right. I think we've pretty much covered that.
Yeah. Look, it's a complex issue. We'd be really keen to hear your thoughts on it. Do you think WYSIWYG for modelling is a requirement, is a good thing for tournaments? Do you think putting some sort of standard like that in for painting is a good thing or not? Let us know in the comments on Facebook, on the bottom of this post. You can leave them in the bottom of the post on the website as well. So get in touch and let us know.
To clarify, though, just in case we haven't been 100% clear, regardless of whether it's a narrative or competitive style event for objectives secured in at least the foreseeable future, we won't be
requiring painting styles.
WYSIWYG.
Yes.
Yeah. But we will be requiring modelling WYSIWYG.
Yes, as we have done for the past
last
couple
3
of years.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to take a break and then we're going to wrap up the episode. Okay, well, what you hear is what you get with us, I suppose, rather than what you see.
Yeah, and it's generally rambling and long.
And around in circles.
Did we manage to keep it under an hour?
Oh, no. That last like 50-something minutes. Maybe bring it under 50 minutes with editing, and the intro is going to be like 15 or 20 minutes at least anyway. Okay. So
awesome.
We'll have to try and keep this one to at least like 10.
Yeah.
To be fair, the outros are only over 5 minutes normally.
I think...
We're a minute in, just by the way.
Stop talking then. I don't know. I just feel like we went round and round in circles with that because I can see it from both sides, and I can't see a sort of a clear answer.
No. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future if they continue down this road and whether other events start adopting it.
Yeah, it will be. We'll definitely be watching that and seeing
the
tournament organisers response and their thoughts and feelings about it, and the players as well.
Yeah, look, and we might be able to reach out to Warhammer World and get some feedback from the guys there that we know who've been working with towards show, and see whether they can give us some feedback on why that decision's been made or how it goes for them for their first GT heats.
Yeah.
It'll be really interesting. But we're going to leave it there, although I do realise I've got one other quick announcement for the end of this episode, which we did on the live stream, and I mentioned it in the intro and then we didn't do it.
Yeah. Okay.
I have to say a welcome to Josh Diffie, joining the OBSEC team, like a fortnight ago, officially?
Was it that long ago?
No, it was a week ago.
I think it was a week ago, yeah.
Josh, he's been part of the 40k scene now for nearly a decade actively. He's a well-known representative for Victoria over on the east coast of Western Australia.
Yes, Victoria is not in Western Australia.
No, it is not. It's a long way away for us.
Fairly sure the Victorians would be quite upset about that. Actually, I think there are a few West Australians would be upset about that too.
Well, I wear both hats because I was born in Victoria, but I live in WA. So.
Yeah, I know you get judged by both.
I know. Josh is also a very good friend of ours. I've known him for a long time. You're still kind of getting to know him a bit, but he's going to be covering off on any East Coast events he goes to. He does a live stream most mornings on his way to work in the car. You'll see those posted live on the OBSEC page. He's going to be joining us for some podcasts in the future. He's done some live with us as well in the past. And I'm really looking forward to adding more content, particularly around competitive 40k, which is his shtick. So welcome along, Josh. I know he's not here tonight, but I'm still saying it. We're recording it.
It's lovely to have you on board.
That's the last shout out you get, man. You've had it on the live stream last week. You've had it today on the podcast. That's it. Yeah.
Now we start making fun of you because you're officially one of the team. So, well, we're still being nice. It means you knew. Yeah.
If you want to check out his website, it's downunderpairings.com, and that's got basically all the rankings and everything for Australia. It's got 90% of the events, I think, now. Most of them are in. And it's also a set of software that TOs can use to run their events. And there's a wiki for it to set it up. It's actually really self-explanatory, a lot of it. He was on the Caledonian Death Watch podcast recently talking about it with the guys from Scotland. Oh, cool. And they're going to start using it and testing it out in Scotland, which is really exciting because up until now it's only been in Australia. So go and check out downunderpairings.com, and you'll probably see some of our ads on there as well because we're working together. So
and we're excited about using Down Under Pairings for Southern Hemisphere Open.
Yeah. So with that, we are going to keep this under 5 minutes. Woohoo.
Yay, us.
You can check us out on every alternate Wednesday live on our Facebook page around 8:30 Western Australian Standard Time, which is about +8, I believe. And then obviously the podcast every other Wednesday around that. Hopefully we get some videos happening soon. I've almost finished the Shadespire cruise. So we'll get some more.
He'd have them finished if he wasn't playing around with a resin Titan kit and what are those little men that are there?
They're little men. They're Drakari Reaver jet bikes.
They are not bikes. They are men.
They're bikes.
They are men that are kneeling down on the table.
Oh, they're the crew. They're the 18 crew.
Are they or are they not little? And are they or are they not men?
No, they're not men. Half of them are women because this is Drakari and they're an equal opportunities murder society.
Okay, well I can't clearly
because
glasses
they're all posed to be riding a bike. They look like they're all on their hands and knees and you can't see their physical aesthetic. Yeah. So they've all got great butts. It's a dark eld, I think. Right. So on that note, we're gonna leave you on the WYSIWYG topic. We will see you in the next episode in about 2 weeks' time.
Happy gaming.
You've been listening to the Objective Secured podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, you can visit our website, objectivesecured.com.au. You can find us on Facebook, Facebook.com/Objective Secured, or you can email us, obsec@optusnet.com.au. Thanks for listening.